Hey everybody, Shoebox Legends here. Thanks for joining me today for a quick look at another T206 card in my collection. So I'm not a, fanatic about collecting these at all. Haven't bought one in ages, quite honestly, but I did go through a period where I was kind of into these and picked up a handful of graded copies. I certainly don't have, hundreds or even dozens, but I may have a dozen, something like that. So up in the background are 4 Red Sox cards that we've looked at in previous episodes over the history of this channel. And today I have a new one that I haven't yet shown, though I've had it for quite some time, from the New York Highlanders. This is Neil Ball, his T206 card, a Piedmont 150 version, which I think is the most common back, although again, I'm not an expert on these at all. I just love the imagery. And this one is graded a lowly 1.5, but probably a fair grade. If you look at those corners, they're pretty well worn, but the image is great. I just love this shot of Neil crouching in the infield. And he was a shortstop, or he kind of became a utility guy later in his career. Didn't know the first thing about him when I bought this card, as is often the case with players that played the game well over 100 years ago now. But I'm just a sucker for history in general and the history of baseball specifically, and I enjoy kind of reading up on these guys once I pick up a card like this. And Neil Ball is interesting in his own right. He was not, a great player by any means. In his rookie season with the Highlanders, I think he set the record for all fielders for most errors, and at least for the American League, he had like 80 errors or something like that, and I think that record still stands to this day, possibly. I can't imagine anyone will ever get 80 errors in a season again. That's like an error every other game. So not a great fielder at the start. Also led the league in strikeouts at the plate his first year. So, not an offensive threat or a fielding threat for the most part, but ironically, he did turn the first unassisted triple play in the history of Major League Baseball, and did so against my hometown Boston Red Sox. Maybe even some of these players that you see in the background were at the game that day. And then later in his career, at the very tail end of it, he actually won a World Series championship by being on the roster with the Red Sox, even though he was only very sparingly used, and I think had maybe just a single at-bat in that World Series, but did qualify and got his championship bonus money and all of that. So pretty interesting story. I don't really know much about Neil Ball other than that, aside from him having a great name for a baseball player and having an interesting image that drew me to this card. And here's a look at the back, which is clean as well. So again, I think this got a 1.5 just based on probably the corner wear. But, just a beautiful looking card. And back when I grabbed this, these were a little bit more affordable. I think you could get a low grade T206 card in a PSA slab exactly like that one for, maybe around $20 or $30, like the cost of a blaster. And that's kind of how I used to view it at the time, is that I would enjoy that card in the future probably more than anything I would have pulled out of a blaster. These days, like everything else in the hobby, I think the price has gone up a little bit, but probably 3 or 4 times that now to land a slabbed T206, which is probably why I haven't bought too many in recent years. But there is Neil Ball for the New York Highlanders, and just another example of the small amount of T206 cards that I have in my collection. I know some of you like the pre-war stuff and the really old stuff, so every so often try to dust one of those off and just do a quick video here where we look at some super old pre-war cardboard. So I hope you enjoyed this brief look at a guy who you've probably never heard of and don't hear much about. And I'll certainly be back in the very near future with some more sports card content. Until then, enjoy the hobby, everybody.